Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael, for the beautiful music. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us. It's a beautiful Saturday morning here in. It's a beautiful Saturday morning here in Seattle, Washington, where we are all gathered. And it's really amazing to be gathered for a beautiful conversation like this, intercommunity dialogue, where we are going to be talking about how we can build, community and long-lasting relationships between the African and African American communities. And before we go too far, I want to invite you, our viewers on YouTube and our attendees on Zoom, to just take a moment and think about why you're here, why you've joined us here today instead of going for a walk or a run or maybe coffee with a friend somewhere else. And when you've thought about that, please feel free to just put it in the chat. We want to learn where you're joining us from. If you want to just type the name of your city, the name of your country, and why today's topic is relevant to you, we would really appreciate that. Then I want to also just ask you, wherever you are, I can't see everybody, but I just want you to um, take a few minutes with me to do a small breathing exercise that will allow us to ground ourselves and be here in this moment. We are discussing a very heavy topic, and I just want us to, first of all, be grateful to the owners of this land that we are calling home right now. So to the natives people, I think we're in the Duwamish land. We want to thank them for giving us the opportunity to be their visitors and to bring our culture and our heritage to enrich their lives. And we hope that our conversation today also uplifts the native people, that we are enjoying their resources. So with that, just close your eyes, and if you have shoes on and it's easy to push them out, please do. I love my slippers. I have very warm and cozy slippers that I wear during this time, and I just took them off so that I could feel the ground. And once you've closed your eyes, just stay with me for another few minutes and just feel your feet on the ground, and just open your arms and, just feel free and feel a little comfortable, and feel your body on the chair that you're sitting on. And let's just take a deep breath in together, through your mouth and out through your nose. Let's just take in a deep breath and hold it for a few seconds. Right now, I just want you to take all your thoughts down to the ground, where your legs, your feet is meeting the floor, the earth. And just stay there for a moment and thank your feet for all the places it has taken you. Let's just bring our minds up slowly to our knees, and just thank our knees for all the work that it does to keep us, steady, and to just keep us, you know, healthy and strong and able to move. Then let's just bring our thoughts to our belly, our core, where most of the tension is always held. And let's just do a little deep breath in together. Okay, let's do one more and hold it. Then let's bring our thoughts to our chest. And, this is where most of, the things that make us breathe and live can be found. Our hearts, our important organs are around this area. Our chest is so important. So let's just thank our chest for keeping all those important organs safe. Our neck, let's take our thoughts to our head. Our beautiful hairstyles and neatness in our head makes us feel proud wherever we go. So let's just thank our hair and our head and our neck for playing the important roles that they play. And let's just, thank our ancestors, the ancestors that were stolen from Africa and ended up being slaves in this land that we live in America. And, just thank them for the pain and the suffering that they had to go through in order for us to live in a democratic, country that we call America. And let's just thank our ancestors who are left behind, wondering where their siblings and their neighbors and their community members were taken, and they died without ever knowing what America looked like. And now we are privileged to know where some of our people were brought. And today we are here to really dive deep into this topic. So just open your eyes and look around the room and just bring your awareness to everybody that is in the room with us right now, and just thank them for being here, So with that, I want to introduce myself. My name is Simon Javan Okelo. I'm from Kenya. My hometown is called Kisumu. And I moved to Seattle, Washington in 2010. I live here with my wife and kids. I'm the founder of One Vibe Africa and also the host of the African Father in America podcast. It's really an honor to be here with you all today. Thank you, Michael Mugambe, for the invitation. Today we are going to have two segments. We are going to have a panel discussion, and then we are going to have a Q&A session. So I know that at the beginning I requested that we collect a few thoughts of where some of you might be coming from or where you're joining us from. So Michael, just gather all that information and then let me know when would be appropriate for me to share it with everybody. But for now, I just want to introduce our panelists, and then I'll ask each of our panelists a question that they will react to. And I'll ask the questions in the order that they were sent. So if I read your bio first, I'm going to start actually with Sierra Smith. Then I'm going to go with Eric Opoku Agiamon. And then we're going to go to Adana Abaporo. So if you just read the questions in order that they were sent and get ready, this is to the panelists, that would be wonderful. Sierra Smith is the Executive Director of Open Path Counseling. Sierra has had the privilege of serving as Executive Director for Open Paths Counseling Center since 2016. Her 15 years of nonprofit experience in both Los Angeles and Chicago shifted over the years from arts and culture to animal welfare, to higher education, to social services. During her tenure, Sierra has doubled the Open Paths budget and clinical team, expanded services by a third, implemented the therapy outreach program, resulting in multiple community-based partnerships, and diversified the board and staff to reflect other communities served. Sierra is a truly accomplished leader, and I would have read most of her information, but I just want you to, just wave at Sarah just to appreciate her for being here with us today. And I'm going to read our next panelist's bio just briefly for you to know some of the leaders that we have on our panel today. Eric Opoku Agiamong uh, is the director for leadership programs at Puget Sound Sage. Eric hails from Ghana, serving as the Leadership Program Director at Puget Sound Sage. He holds an MSW from the University of Washington and currently is pursuing his PhD in social welfare at UW. Before joining Sage, Eric founded a nonprofit, Cheerful Hearts Foundation, which facilitates cross-cultural collaboration between African Americans, and in both the continent and abroad. Additionally, he centers Black liberation in his mentoring and leadership work, and has participated in conferences, including the HACSA Summit, working to bridge connections with the diaspora. So let's wave at Eric just quickly so that he knows that we appreciate him. And now we are going to introduce Adana Abaporo, who is the Equity and Family Engagement Facilitator at the Lake Washington School District. Adana Abaporo is an Equity and Family Engagement Facilitator at the Lake Washington School District. Abaporo was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and is first-generation Nigerian. Abaporo's parents immigrated to the US from Nigeria in the late 1980s. Abaporo graduated from the University of Washington in 2015 with 2 degrees in disability studies and social welfare. I'm really proud of Abaporo's accomplishments, and I just want you to wave as we welcome our amazing panelists. And for the first question, which is going to be responded to by Sarah Smith, the question is around, beliefs, experiences, and misconceptions about, the African and African American communities. We all have things that we think about other people. There is this saying that, people are always afraid of what they don't know. And this is quite true in our discussion today. And if you look at the relationships between Africans and African Americans, there is always the tension, and especially because if you don't know, you don't know. So welcome, Sierra.
Thank you. I want to start by saying that I can only speak to my own experiences, and I can only speak to the observations I've made living as a Black woman in America, and also recognizing that as an ethnically mixed Black woman, I hold privilege in a way that some of my other brothers and sisters don't, as a light-skinned person, and as the fact that my mother is white, and I recognize that there's privilege that comes with that. So I have to acknowledge that how I move through society is representative, but it also is a different experience than many other people. So I just want to say that I only speak on behalf of myself. But when we're talking about, in my experience, the misconceptions around Black people in the United States, what I'm seeing right now in our current political system, I think, is indicative of what's historically been the misrepresentation, which is this notion of individualism, and we should have pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps by now. And the reason why so many Black people are still living in poverty or still struggling with what we refer to as the social determinants of health and other areas is because of our own fault, our own laziness, our own lack of education, our own lack of intelligence. And it's not looked at it holistically for what it really is, which is the fact that Black people have lived for over 400 years rooted in historical violent oppression that continues until this day. And that as a people, show me any other people that have lived with this level of historical violence that continues to perpetuate them societally and has thrived at the level that we have. And it's an interesting paradigm that I'm hearing a lot right now in the dominant culture, particularly as what I term the revolution is coming about, and people who are not Black are starting to awaken to the systemic oppression and violence that is perpetrated our communities for as long as, as long as we've been here. Um, and they're just now starting to see it in a different way. And we see this cycle happening about every 50 years where we go through this cycle of awakening again by non-Black people, where they go, oh, wait, this is still an issue. And it comes back up. And that's because every time it comes to the forefront, then you see the pushback coming from non-Black people of, oh, well, now things are better. And then they don't look at the ways in which the systems continue to close in and oppress, because fundamentally, we have a society that is based on the violent oppression of Black people who have built this society. And that reckoning means that white people would have to so fundamentally shift their thinking and shift their understanding of what the history of the United States is, that it makes it so uncomfortable that it's easier to continue to deny and dissociate and live with the dominant paradigm messaging about it being our own futility as opposed to what it really is, which is violent oppression. So that's my answer to why there's the misconception about Black people out there. I hope I answered the question.
You did wonderfully. I do have a follow-up question, but I want to first recognize a few of our guests today who have dropped information about where they're joining us from. We have Dominique JJ joining us from Los Angeles. Welcome. We have Joanne from Uganda. Welcome. And we have Latu, who says that I am happy I joined today. This is a breath of fresh air. Thank you. Uh, so my follow-up question is in relation to a podcast episode where I was interviewing Dr. Henry Richardson, who is a psychologist and an expert in, um, in dealing with criminals that have mental issues, including the person that shot at President Kennedy. He was Henry Richards was the head of the prison where this type of people are being kept. He's from Seattle and he's also African American, but he's brown like you. He's light, And he was describing to me a story of, some of the challenges that he faces as a light-skinned Black African American. These challenges he also faced when he went to Africa. He goes to Nigeria a lot because he has traced his roots to Nigeria. In fact, he's writing a book about the time he spent in Nigeria as a teenager. But the incident that I wanted to ask as a follow-up question is, your experience as a light-skinned African American. Dr. Henry was telling me that his father said that he would only marry a light-skinned African American woman because he does not want his kids to go through the suffering that he went through. And he was giving me examples of how sometime he was working with his father as a kid, and they were just being stopped by police in Chicago and made to lay down it was like a curfew, like apartheid, you know. And sometime they would let him go and keep his father. And so, I just wanted you to give us an example of a story like that, if you've ever experienced something like that.
Well, I will tell you in my personal experience, my father is very dark complected, and my older sister, whose mother is African American, is also very dark complected. And I have absolutely had the experience, particularly as it relates to being with my older sister, where out in public, I've been associated as being the pretty one, or my hair has been something that has come up from time to time because I have long hair. and the notion of having the good hair, which is something I'm sure many of us have heard. And the fact of the matter is, colorism exists throughout many cultures. It exists in Asian cultures, it exists in Hispanic cultures, and it absolutely exists in Black cultures. And so there are ways in which my ability to assimilate and put the dominant culture of white people at ease has been something that I've been able to use to my advantage. And there's something that I have to recognize, that I have an ability to code switch that's impeccable depending on where I'm at and what I'm doing and who I'm with. And I recognize that with that privilege comes the responsibility also of, number one, calling out that I live my life in a code switching format. And number two, that I do it to put the dominant culture at ease, so that way the messaging I have for when I talk about, at least within the scope of my experience, the historical trauma that has been inflicted on Black people by white oppressive society, they can hear it. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, how can I frame this in a way that is accessible, emotionally accessible to them? Because I recognize that for me, that's a way that I can use my privilege. Recognizing at the same time that the righteous anger that Black people have in this society deserves to be owned the way it is, and should not be mitigated to have to make white people feel comfortable. And we live in that paradigm, right? We live in that paradigm of, we have to keep a certain level of comfortability to white people to be able to exist within the racist systems that are there, yet at the same time, hold on to what I call righteous anger in that way. And I will share with you on a personal note, my father was incarcerated for the first time at 16 years old. He's now 78. And he was incarcerated for an activity. He was 16 and broke into a store. He at that time was going to a school with predominantly white children. And he was with two other white boys who did not get any time. And he happened to be a big man, and he happened to be a very dark-skinned man. And he wasn't a man at that point, he was a boy. But at 6 feet-ish, at 16, and being dark-skinned, and being that he was in Washington, D.C., he was put in a federal penitentiary with adults. And the trauma that happens for a teenage boy who has experienced oppressive poverty and historical abuse, when you look at the intergenerational trauma that's happened in my family on my father's side. Now we're looking so much at trauma as it relates to what's often termed criminal behavior, but I tend to think of it a lot of times as adaptive circumstances to oppressive environments. They wouldn't have put, I find it hard to believe that, in fact, I know, because the white boys that he was with were not put in that situation. And that set a dynamic, being imprisoned with adults at 16 years old until he was 22, for how he learned to adapt to society, right? And then this is also at a time where that trauma was never recognized. It became this framework of criminality that then continued to perpetuate itself as a defense mechanism to survive in a society that has criminalized him in this way and views him in this way. So if we look at how we think about people who are termed criminal, so much of that is historical, oppressive, violent trauma that they have experienced, that they have learned adaptive behaviors towards. And while those adaptive behaviors may be maladaptive in certain settings and ways, the fact of the matter is that for many of our people who are incarcerated, that is broken attachment, that is a trauma at a childhood level, that is epigenetics from a history of enslavement and a history of violence. And so you can't look at, when people talk about criminals, you can't disassociate and call people criminals in that way without looking at the systems that have influenced behavior to get them there, because they're not separate things.
Thank you so much. That's a perfect way that will lead us to the next question. You said that you cannot blame individuals without considering the systems that brought them to where we are, right? And the next question is, how have systems created and influenced and influenced and created division and tensions between the African and African American communities? And this question is going to be responded to by Eric Opoku Agiamong, who is the Director of Leadership Programs at Puget Sound Sage. My brother, please.
Right. Thank you, Simon. And thank you, Sarah, for just the deep insight that you just shared. Really appreciate that. And really, when we talk about systemic barriers, it's first of all rooted in the misconceptions that we've been made to believe about each other, right? Because we're looking at the root causes of it. If someone can pitch you against each other, then there might be something that they're using against you. So first of all, we've been made, especially folks who are here, me as an immigrant, sometimes you go into workspaces and you're made to believe, again, some of the misconceptions that African Americans are lazy, or they are not taking the opportunities, or they are not ready to do this, they are violent, and all of that, right? So these are things that those of us who were African born are made to believe when we're coming here. And they will pull you down, misconceptions, right? And this always comes from that single storyline. You have one, so there's that lens, right? And I had the opportunity to work with UW through a study abroad program called Sankofa, and through a nonprofit that I founded in Ghana. And so there were these issues that came up. We had a dialogue, and some revealed that also African Americans, some African Americans are also made to believe that we sold them into slavery, right? And so there's that tension and that hatred that the white man has created between us, first from the roots. Of course, if you're made to believe that your own family sold you into slavery, it's justified that you should be upset. It's, we can't blame each other. First of all, that's the first thing we have to understand, that we can't blame each other, but we're now looking at the root causes of the tension that exists between us. And the white man did not talk about taking the strongest people while also enslaving those that remained. That part of the story was never shared. So in conversations, I had to share why, when we talk about independence in Africa, the story behind the independence, the struggles, the blood that was shed even after slavery. When we talk about redlining in Seattle, we talk about redlining and all this segregation, it also happened. Folks who've been to Ghana and in Accra, if you go to the Independence Square, if you've been to the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park, those were places that Black people in their own country could not even go there. So they've done it in a very sneaky and maybe creative way that it's so easy for both sides to believe each other. So one party is made to believe that you sold them, and then on the other side, you're also not knowing, and on another side, those of us who are born in the country are also making us believe that they are not hardworking, they are not doing all these things right, they are violent and all of this. So these things get into our minds, right? And so we tend to hate each other. But the white man is also not talking about the inventions of African Americans. The ones that even invented stuff, the patents that they were supposed to get in their names were denied. Those things are not talked about. The ones that built this country, as Sarah said, was built on the backs of slaves. Those things are not talked to the folks of us who were born in the continent. And so we're all in this space where we're not getting a clear picture of what is really happening, the oppressor, what is really happening, right? And so when we get here as immigrants, our whole thing is we're still thinking about, okay, these people are this way, right? Then the question is that how do we get deeper into understanding, even if somebody is violent? Let's look at even the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Somebody might term it as, oh, some people are being violent, some people are being this way. But the question is that what is the root of their actions? Why are people, do you think that if people are okay, they will just get on the streets and just do, like, people also want to have peace. People want to be happy. Black people have been oppressed for so long. So it feels like those misconceptions are being used as a way to divide us, even within the systems. So you are an immigrant, you think that you're the smartest person, you're the most hardworking person in the workspace, and then you tend to hate your own brother who came here, who's brought here as a slave for many years to build this country and to build even the spaces in which you work. You're not recognizing that, right? And then when you don't recognize that, your own brothers and sisters who came here before you are also having that feeling that you're not even giving me that respect. First of all, I'm also made to believe that you sold me. And now you're feeling big even over my space or in my space, right? And so I feel like that keeps on perpetuating that concept, that mindset that systems are dividing us.
Thank you so much. I want to add a comment and a follow-up question, and this is to all the panelists to also think about, as well as the audience members. There's this idea of white space. You just spoke to it. A lot of the systems and the structures that we created it for white people. We didn't create it with Black people in mind. If you think about even Black architecture, it's quite different with the architecture we see. It depicts a lot of freedom, a lot of nature. If you see how we almost design the way nature designs.
Mhm.
And so again, Dr. Henry Richardson has been writing an essay about white space, and I've been thinking about it since him and I started talking about it. If you think about the segregated America, there were spaces that were white. If you think about South Africa, there were spaces that were white. But if you think about the whole world, this segregation of people based on whiteness and whether that space is for other people besides white people, all of this is put in place by systems that have been created to influence and divide and create the tension. And if you go even back further, when we speak about the divide and rule idea, you find that in Africa, in every single country, we've all been divided by the white colonialists that colonized us on tribal lines, where when they were leaving Africa, they left it for a specific tribe, and then they were still supporting another tribe and saying those people, they want to take everything from you. So it's, if we are wise, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is a well-known African scholar, says that the biggest work is in decolonizing the minds of African people globally, because what also the white world fears the most is the unity of African people. Can you imagine Africans united from Brazil to Barcelona, from Barcelona to Johannesburg? Do you know how much economic power that is? Do you know how much or employment opportunities that can create? So these type of things are scary for people who are afraid of equality and justice. And my brother, I want you to give us an example of how you see these systems that are being used to divide people, a comparison between Ghana, because you've worked extensively in Ghana, and Ghana is considered, the foundation for the African democracy. So give us an example of where you've seen the divide and rule or white space concept being used in Africa, and you've also seen the same thing here, to help our audience members really see that we are dealing with the same issue.
Okay, well, that's thank you. That first of all, I would like to say that the Western world know that they cannot survive without Africa. And so that's also part of the reason why they will continue to divide us. And I appreciate the fact that you talked about wisdom. And so hopefully, and my prayer is that we're all going to use our wisdom and then come together, irrespective of the indifferences that exists right now. Speaking about examples of systemic barriers in Ghana, as an example, let's look at businesses. When white people establish business in Ghana, right? It is so easy for the business owned by a white person to go through their business registration so quick compared to, first of all, even the Ghanaians themselves. And that is how much oppression and slavery and colonialism has impacted us, right? Because when not only are the businesses moving faster, you end up even realizing that they are creating more opportunities for them to be able to have lower maybe cost of production, because they are creating more incentives for the Westerner and their businesses to thrive well. So you end up having the locals patronizing the businesses that belongs to the Westerner compared to the local people. So you create an experience where the Western businesses are going, the local businesses are competing with the Western businesses, but the Western business will go up because they have more incentives, and they're also having access to, it's easier for a white person or somebody light skinned to get loans compared to Black people. And it actually happens everywhere, right? And so if they get access to those loan credit facilities, they'll be able to expand their businesses. They'll be able to look lower cost of production. And of course, that reflects in the cost of items or whatever they produce. And so local people will want cheaper cost. Already when you have a poor economy, you have most of people wanting a cheaper product and be able to survive, right? When it happens that way, what do? You're creating more wealth for the white people. You're creating more wealth for the light-skinned people, right? And if you create more wealth for them, of course, then they're able to build, they have their own area where they live because they're able to build the mansions, right? Where people, just the rich people, and of course, when the rich people are the ones who are able to make more money, right? And so they have their own space. If you go to places like Accra, like Reggie Manuel Gray, if you go to like East Legon, there are like cantonments, parts of Accra. Like you go there and you can see a lot more white. It looks like that's like a white neighborhood, right? Compared to, and then the other parts of Accra belongs to the other Ghanaians. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's crazy and weird. It's so easy for white people to access your own president than the natives. You see how power has really, like influenced the way we do things?
Yeah, man, it's true. What you're saying is true. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Eric, for your response to my follow-up question. And I want to welcome my dear sister, Triana Holiday, who is a shaker, a mover and shaker here in Seattle. And is part of Africa Town Land Trust, as well as Converge Media. She's really a leading figure in the Black liberation movement here in Seattle. So it's an honor that she was able to join us. Just for those who have not met Triana, I just want to read a little bit about her. Triana Holiday is a true Seattleite who has watched her city change in many ways through studying abroad and being displaced by gentrification. She's now fueled to tell her neighborhood story through film and education while working on the solutions. So you learn more about her as she speaks. But now I want to go to the third question that will go to my sister Anna Abakporo. And this question is, how has the divide affected Black Lives Matter, racial liberation movements, and involvement in those movements? So the divisive systems that have been created here in the US and globally against Black people, how have they made it impossible for us to unite, basically?
Yes, yeah. Thank you for that question. Thank you everybody for joining with us today. Really appreciate it, and appreciate all my panelists. And nice to meet you, Triana. Really appreciate you joining us. Yeah, so exactly what Eric and Sierra have mentioned, there is that divide. And growing up as someone born and raised in Seattle, had parents emigrate from Nigeria, I was in both of those worlds where for me, I grew up with immigrant parents, but I grew up in the US, and I felt like for me, I was in this middle where for me, I felt that I was too Black for the Nigerian community because I can't speak Igbo. I'm not as fluent as like my cousins that are born and raised in Nigeria. But then I felt like I was too Nigerian for the Black community because I felt that there were some experiences that I did not experience growing up. And then growing up, I've heard different things about the Black community, how I need to, articulate my thoughts and words. I have to make sure I really am careful with Black people that I hang out with, that I shouldn't, fall into the stereotype of what it's like to be a Black American, African American in the US. And growing up, I never understood why that was. I never understood there was that differentiation between being a Black African American and being African. With my relatives, they would say, Adana, at the end of the day, you're Nigerian. You're American because you're born here, but you're Nigerian. And I felt that with that divide, I've had, older Africans that would tell me, well, you are Nigerian. The things that are going on in the Black community, that does not affect us. And I always felt like there was this hierarchy that because Africans knew where to trace their roots, that they knew they're from Nigeria, or from the Congo or Ghana or other African countries, they felt somewhat better than Black Americans. And they felt that, everything the Black community is facing, like racism, systemic racism, poverty, that doesn't affect us. We're Africans. As long as we work hard, as long as we get the degrees, as long as we pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, we are not like Black Americans in this country. And to this day, sometimes I still hear about, the stereotypes, Black people are lazy, Black people are thugs, Black people are into drugs. And it's very puzzling, very confusing, and just outright wrong. And so with the BLM movement and with Black liberation, I think the reason why we're seeing that divide is because there's still some people that believe those stereotypes. Like some Africans, I think, at the end of the day, like, this doesn't affect me. Like, everything about the Black Lives Matter movement, those issues, that doesn't affect me and then shouldn't affect me. So how can I be a part of that? When, yes, in a way, the Black experience, African experience, it's not a monolith. It's very complex, it's multifaceted. At the end of the day, though, we are still under the system of oppression. We can't, unfortunately, that brings us together, and that should bring us together. That's why we need to be out there, we're trying to work hard to be together. And I truly believe, and like Eric said, if we all come together, imagine all the power that we have, because we do have a lot of power, not just individually, but as a community, as communities, we have that power. And I feel that we have to understand that, yes, there might be some differences because, some Africans, we know where our roots come from, and Black Americans sometimes, with DNA testing, with ancestry testing, they can figure that out. But at the end of the day, like, we are Black, we are African. Yes, understand that there's differences, but understand too that we as a community need to come together. And as long as we can try to understand that, I think we can do so much. There's nothing that we can't do. And I truly believe that's so important. And so I feel that the divide, yes, there's like so many differences, but if we can just, recognize those differences and acknowledge it, but then understand that we need to know that we need to take some action because we are all affected by all this. There have been so many Africans, unfortunately, that have passed, so many Africans that from like different countries, coming here to the US and have gone killed and have been, facing systemic oppression. Not just Black people, not just Black Americans. But I truly believe that these stereotypes that we have, it's because of, white people. Like, the white man has made us believe all these different things about Black people. Like, and in Africa too, like when people come here, they think that, oh, what the white man is saying is true. Like, Black people are this way. No, we are all very hardworking people. We all know what we're doing, what we have to do to survive. And I truly believe, again, like I keep saying, I truly believe that yes, our Black experience is not the same. It's not a monolith. It's multifaceted, complex, but that could bring us together wholeheartedly. And I truly believe that we can, have so much power with that.
Thank you so much, Adana.
Absolutely.
I have a follow-up question for you as an educator. I was saying earlier that Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o really advocates for the decolonizing of the mind for Black people globally. And educators play a big role in this. I am a father of 3 girls, and I've been very persistent with teaching them Luo and Kiswahili, which are not languages spoken, in America for the most part. And you find that if I stop teaching them for 1 week, they forget, they lose even interest. But if I teach them, and like every morning on weekdays, I turn on BBC Kiswahili, during the entire breakfast time, then I just listen to what they say in the background. They're mad, but they're talking about the words that they remember, And so it's sometimes, as an educator, good for you to have many enemies, but you ensure that the mission that we have for our collective is accomplished.
Mhm.
When you think about someone like Malcolm X, when he was in exile, he was going to school in Tanzania. Many people don't even know that. When Nelson Mandela was in exile in Ethiopia, he was going to school there. So what are some ways that as an educator you think that we could, another example that actually Triana is familiar with is Omari and his son. They were in Tanzania, and that's where Omari really built the muscle for journalism. And, he tells me that all the time whenever I meet with him. So what are some examples or ways that you think our listeners can educate their kids and can connect their kids with educational opportunities that enhance our relationships as Africans and African Americans, and also decolonize our minds?
Yes, absolutely. Like you just said, Simon, decolonizing, it's absolutely important. As someone who works in the school district, I find that in order for our kids, our students to learn more, we need to have representation. We can't just keep having the same type of history lessons, same type of curriculum where it's just, predominantly white people that we are looking at, that we are studying. Again, I'm going to say for me personally, growing up in Seattle, most of the time when I would hear about Black activists or people and other African activists, all I heard about, was just Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks. I heard a little bit about Nelson Mandela, tiny bit about Malcolm X, but that was it. And it was only during Black History Month in February where I actually learned some of these people. And unfortunately, it wasn't until I went to college at UW where I took a couple African American studies classes where I learned so many more people that have done so much, in the US and in African countries. Like I didn't know much about, W.E.B. Du Bois. I didn't know much about Malcolm X. I didn't know much about Nelson Mandela and his exile. I just, like what Simon, you saying Malcolm X being in Tanzania, I didn't even know about that until a couple years ago. And so I think it's so important that we need to have representation. We need to make sure that these students are seeing people that look like us. How else are they going to be able to feel supported? How else are they going to feel like people understand, are trying to understand where they come from? And it also goes on into the home too. I love my parents, and I know for them they had their own reasons as to why I didn't, and my siblings didn't learn too much Igbo. That's a native language in Nigeria for us, but that was due to assimilation, and for them they didn't want us to have a hard time in the U.S. But like what you said, Simon, having BBC Swahili on, having news on with like different African anchors, and like learning about what's going on in Africa, and trying to make sure that our kids are open to all of these things, as well as making sure that we talk about, racial equity, we talk about race, we talk about different ethnicities. And, for me, I think, at least in like the PNW, Pacific Northwest, talking about race for people, like some white people, is very difficult. Like they don't want to talk about it. Either it's because they're afraid, they don't want to say the wrong thing, they don't want to offend someone, but it's not even, it doesn't matter anymore. At this point now, We need to do a service for our students and talk about it. They're seeing it as young, doesn't matter how young you are, kids, especially students of color, immigrant students, Black and brown students, they know what's going on. They see that there's mistreatment. They may not know how to articulate it. They may not know the words like microaggression, implicit bias, privilege, target agent identities. They may not know those words, but they know what is going on. And so I think if we are very comfortable, we're open to talking about it, even asking, like, how are you doing? You know, how's everything going for you? Because I guarantee, and I tell these to my teachers, I guarantee you, these students know what's happening. They know what's going on. They know how it's affecting them. They just may not know the words to say it. So decolonizing the curriculum, having more representation and all across the board, like all different classes, making sure you talk about it, make sure you have an open conversation, open space to talk about it. So that way, when you are talking about this, not only are you building that knowledge and knowing of the different cultures, different representation, different people that look like them, you're also building rapport. You're also building that trust. You're building that relationship. And if I had that when I was in school, I would have learned so much more. And I felt like I would have been able to be even closer with my teachers than I was before. And being able to be open about it, I feel like that's so important and it's very vital.
It's clear that you're passionate about this.
Yes, you can tell.
Thank you so much. You know, I want to pose the next question to Triana. The next question is really related to what we are going to do from here. What can we do together so that things are better? You know, there's a saying that you should plant a tree even if you will not enjoy its shade, you know? And so I feel that our generation, we are definitely planting a tree. Of course, our ancestors and our parents planted a tree. You know, I lost my mother less than a month and a half ago, and she was a fighter, a warrior, a woman that that did so many things that were not acceptable for women to do in the African context. Um, and it really clarified to me that I've started, you know, planting trees myself. The time for enjoying her shadow, the shadow that she created, the trees that she planted, is over. um so, you know, Triana, since this year began, it's been a completely crazy year, and you've literally been at the front line. You know, every day I've seen your Facebook lives with Omari. I've seen how much you've sacrificed, and at first I want to thank you, you know, for all that you know, work that you've put in from your heart. And I want you to share with us what we can do. You know, how can we come together as a community? How can we come together while understanding the differences in our communities and the challenges that we have? Please.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for bringing me on the panel side. I was on the other side. So I was here the whole time, but I was just on the other side. And I was like, wait, am I still speaking today? So thank you, Michael, for getting me on. Thank you, Simon, for introducing me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And it's so great to see all of the panelists here. So great to see you, Eric. It's been a long time. Great to see you. And great to meet you, Sierra and Adana. I will say that, you know, when we think about next steps, we actually identify a lot of what was spoken about today on the panel. We have to be clear that what kind of productive measures can we do right now to eradicate the ideals that are put in African immigrants when they even come over here. Some of you spoke to that. The idea that, oh, don't fall into that Black American, you know, stereotype. Oh, they are this or they are that. You're told things that make you then perceive Black Americans in a very particular way. So how do we attack that, first of all? Because that is nothing more than an extension of colonialism. So we have, when we're talking about decolonizing our systems and decolonizing our minds, it really starts with the understanding that, first and foremost, narratives are described, narratives are implanted, and we have to uproot them. Last summer, I was working with the Yesler community, which is primarily East African community. And I was working with youth. And it was the first time that I really had the opportunity to work directly with, African youth. And they were maybe some of them born in America, right? Like first generation Americans, or maybe just got here when they were small. So what they've known is America, right? And this dynamic and like the relationships I was able to build during this time with these young people really showed me something that we also have to really think about when we talk about where we're going and how we move forward. And that is that there is this identity around Black America that I'm seeing being so absorbed by young Africans, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, I want all the hip hop. My pants are going to sag. I'm going to create my own little clique and gang because like, that's what we do in America. And I'm almost going to kind of denounce a bit of my, immigrant status. Like, I don't really want to identify as, that. I know I'm that. I get it. I know I'm that. But again, I don't want to necessarily learn the language because I don't want to be different than the people I'm going to school with. I want to assimilate. So for me, there's all of these ideals that we have to eradicate. First and foremost, it's a beautiful thing that those from the continent have that connection. It's a beautiful thing that that culture is still strong, that parents are wanting to teach their children. Thank you, Simon, for putting that on the BBC, because absolutely, if I had that opportunity, I would want it wholeheartedly. My experience is very unique. My son's father, I was with him for 18 years, 17 years. His father is Nigerian. So when we went to Chicago and got to experience these Nigerian weddings and, connecting with that Nigerian heritage and that part of my son's life, I tell you, I was so moved by the sense of culture and tradition and the strong nature that it just carried through so many people, the community that is built there with all of these people from Nigeria that live in Chicago, that all know each other, that all congregate together, and they go to each one of the children's weddings and they make sure they have all of the dishes prepared. And, I'm learning about how to make these things. And I'm telling my son, straight up, I said, this is something we don't have. I don't have this as a Black American. And I'm so honored that you are able to see this from a young age. I'm honored that there's a tradition around marriage in the Igbo tribe that allows for families to understand the other person before you make that strong commitment. There is a deep-seated, rooted tradition and culture that now my sons will be able to have the ability to connect with. I didn't have that, and I think we have to talk about that when we think about next steps. I think we have to empower the young African immigrants to understand, please hold on to your culture. The assimilation practice is nothing more than colonialism. They don't want you to have it because honestly, they want you to desire to be the model minority. And they didn't have to do much to kind of push in that direction, because already the idea of coming to America was for freedom, was for liberation, was for the opportunity, right? I want to build a business. I'm not able to do that in my home country. My home country is war torn. I got to get out. I got to do this. Look, I'm making a better life for my family when I come to America. And so that idea that they instill that in their children, we're going to get better education opportunities. When you're here, when you don't do what the Blacks do, but you try to understand how to pull yourselves up, we're going to create the boots for you to pull up from the bootstraps. We're going to create the shoestrings, right? It is, for me, it is that a deeper understanding that American dream is still a dream for so many in America. It's not a reality. So what do we have to do to make that a reality? And this is where I've been pressing a lot of my effort, is that we have the ability to create the American dream. We actually do, each and every one of us. I love what Adana said, because it is about connectivity. It is about how we literally bring everybody into this movement that is of like mind, right? There are some that are not going to be there. There are some that are not going to want to hear this. There are some that are not going to want to give up their privilege, give up their authority, give up their power, give up their money, give up their wealth, whatever it is, in order to create this equity balanced system that we all kind of understand as the American dream. But we have to begin to uproot certain systems and infuse them with systems of equity, and infuse them with new systems that are collaborative, that bring in discussions just like this, so we can eradicate those ideals that permeate our mind, that keep us trapped. It is literally us that's doing it to ourselves. So how do we liberate ourselves? I think that's so much of what we need to identify, understand, and begin to strategize around, so that we can unweave a lot of this damage that has been brought upon us, all of us, with regard to colonialism. I always bring it back to that, because I think if you only think about capitalism, you're missing a lot of this other stuff. And if you only think about, you're missing this, but you have to understand, it was this colonial thing. They literally were like, look, we're going to take over the whole world, and this is how we're going to do it. We got to attack the minds of the people. We got to strip them from their culture. We got to make them feel ashamed of their culture. We have to make them feel ashamed of their culture. That ideal permeates through so many African families that are living here in America. And so I think that when we talk about next steps, we first have to think it's the Sankofa method. Let's remember where we come from, so we can know how to make these steps forward. And also, the collaboration is key. You can't do this in one group, one organization, one community, it is all of us together. I think when we stand in solidarity, we create this larger fist of power. And this, to me, is the beauty of people power. We've seen it here explode in Seattle. How do we utilize a lot of that energy to continue and press us forward? I think we have it here. We have it with so many great coalitions. And, those coalitions are accepting more folks. They're like, look, if you're not plugged in yet, get plugged in, right? Because there's room for us all. And there's expertise that comes from each one of the sectors that is so needed in terms of building that American dream. What does it look like? I have a 14-year-old and a 6-year-old, 2 Black men that I'm going to be raising. For me, this is not, you're right. I got to plant the seeds now, because that tree needs to grow. It needs to grow in every forest in this country. We need to begin to elevate our ideology, get away from a lot of the things that have really kept us isolated. And that isolation has not allowed us to formulate the people power we need. So I'm loving that we've seen it. We've seen an explosion of it. We need to continue in that regard and really bring all of our brilliance into the work, because that's how we do it. We do it together.
Beautiful, beautiful, so beautiful. Thank you. It's really a privilege to be with everybody here today. If you're just joining us, we are in the Intercommunity Dialogue presented by Immigrant Guide, and we are talking about community amidst the racial justice movement that is going on globally. And I want to ask the audience members to start submitting their questions. The next segment is going to be Q&A. It's going to end at exactly 1 o'clock. So just send in your questions and I will read them out. If they're directed to a particular panelist, they will respond to it. But I have a question that is going to bring everything together, for the audience members as you write the questions, and also for the panelists. When you think about colonization, it was a global phenomena. When you think about capitalism, it's a global phenomena. The idea was to colonize us so that they could become rich off of that. They could become the capitalists. They could decide who gets the aid from IMF and who does not get it. Then for example, yesterday I was listening to the BBC Kiswahili, and Zambia is for the first time going to be unable to pay its national debt to the International Monetary Fund. And can you imagine living in a country where you're hearing in the news that your country is not going to be able to pay its debt, it's completely discouraging, you know. And I felt like they were not treating Zambia as a country, they were treating it as a piece of garbage, you know. And when I think about the liberation of Black people, I think about it globally, you know, but also when you think about Black people globally, we are a community of traumatized people. You know, we are always trying to recover from the trauma. And when we are so close to recovery, then another trauma happens, you know. When you're so close to recovery, another trauma happens, you know. So it's always we've always lived in a way that we are stuck in this cycle of trauma. So I wanted you to help me and help our audience members understand, and this is something that I'll ask Sierra to respond to, just a 1 minute response, and then Eric, and then Dana, and then Triana. You know, how do we navigate the Black diaspora globally, considering the trauma that we're dealing with collectively?
That is a big question. And I'm going to preface this again by saying I am not a mental health professional. I do have some thoughts, though. One of the thoughts that I have is that for everybody, regardless of where you're at, and this is partially related to the impact of trauma, but it's also looking at how do we think about ourselves and where we fit in this movement and in society itself, is as we're evaluating situations and circumstances and the media and that we're being fed and the political narratives that we're being fed and the dominant narratives that we're being fed, think about who does this benefit, right? We have to always remember to ask, who is benefiting by this messaging? Who is benefiting by this system that I'm participating in? Who is benefiting by whatever the flow, the direction of flow that the process that I'm involved in this moment is going? Because if we can start to evaluate that, we can see where we fit within this and we can adjust. And that also allows us to recognize when perhaps we're being manipulated by systems, when perhaps we're being pitted against each other. And if we can evaluate our own thinking in that way, we can start to bridge some of those gaps. We can also think about how we're thinking about each other. When I used to teach a class, I would talk about, and these are not my terms, these are terms that are in there, but hierarchical thinking. Is this messaging that I'm being taught, or is this messaging that I'm thinking as I think about this other person from this other culture somehow elevating me and lowering them? Because if it is, then I have to look at who's benefiting by that type of hierarchical thinking, because it could be that that hierarchical thinking framework has been implanted in me by the dominant culture as a way to divide and conquer. So always having that. As far as how do we heal such a globalized level of trauma, I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think there's an easy solution. But I think that one of the things we can continue to do, as has been said, is to educate ourselves and to understand that the narrative that we've been given, that we are responsible for our own trauma and that it is our own individual fault that we have not lived up to standards that have been set by an outside culture that has been oppressing us for a very, very long time, is not a personal failure. And everything is put on us as if it's a personal failure, right? And if we go back and we can look at the collective historical trauma that has impacted, I'm not sure I'm comfortable speaking outside of, broader communities because I don't know everybody's experience. But going back to Dr. Joy DeGruy talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? And how epigenetically that has impacted people, and how because of, again, historical trauma that's happened, we're living in this state of hypervigilance, which continues to be reignited as we look at the murders of Black people at the hands of the police and people who want to be police and such. We can take that out of being a personal failing because it's not, it's survival. And our survival is beautiful, right? And our survival is imperative to the survival of the entire country and to the entire world. And if we can own some of that part of it, that ability to persist and resist that Black people have historically, and look at that strength that comes from that, instead of, and sort of replace the dominant paradigm of not being enough, being traumatized in a way. I don't want to take away the impact of that, but that's not all that we are, right? That is not all that has happened in our cultures. There is so much beautiful, wonderful elements of our cultures that we can also look at, that we can focus on, while also dismantling these other systems. So there's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Eric, please.
Right. That's a lot of sense, Sarah. And I think, Trina, you shared something powerful, that you talked about the using our collective skills to support each other. That's the way forward. When I just in addition to what Sarah shared, when I came to Seattle, I think I would say like halfway my time here, I joined a nonprofit organization called kind of like Recruiting Mentors to support our Black youth. And I actually helped in recruiting almost like over close to 300 Black males to mentor Black youth in Seattle. And one of the ways that I've really seen that we can work together or come together or heal together is to really be in community with each other and to learn from each other and to understand why we do what we do, the different, and learn each other's culture. And I really like how, Triana, you shared about, just being involved in those weddings and, that red culture, that experience. So like there are cultures that we can learn from each other and use that to support each other. Aside from the mentoring, within the mentoring program, we had a healing circle for Black males, mainly Black males. And interestingly, the manual for the healing circle had the teams from the Ashanti tribe, the Adinkra symbols, and I'm an Ashanti. So like I was really surprised that those were, the words and their meanings that I could just take. I took the book, I became the facilitator, and then just explain the deep cultures, the reasons behind it, things that are not shared in this country, right? And the values of Black people that has been taken away for years, especially folks that were brought here. And you can see like really, really top people in society shedding tears and just like sharing their personal experiences, and also helping me like to really understand where people are coming from and the hurts. And, so it's like, it was a very beautiful space where we can all heal together. Like people are sharing their stories. I'm also sharing stories from what I'm used to, and people are just connecting. It was just charged. It was like once in a month, and it was a charged room that nobody wanted to miss that session until this pandemic came in. So I really believe in the sense of just coming together. And this is not like you're going with it. I mean, we're healing and we're going to be hurting each other at the same time. It is not a promise that there will be statements that both parties will be hurt. But at the same time, because of the future, right, we will become selfless in the process of getting to know each other. I'll give an example. When we were doing this, when every week we go in the schools to mentor our Black youth, there was even one of our Black brothers that one time asked me a question that, hey, I heard that like African bonds believe that they are much better than African Americans. What do you think? Who is better? That's a tricky question. I just said, brother, I think that we're all good. We're all one people, like in a jovial way. But those are just examples. Those are things that people will share. And sometimes to the point that, oh, maybe you don't really understand this, and so just leave this side for us and things like that. But I never gave up. I never gave up. I always because I knew the root. I know where the brother is coming from. I know where my brothers are coming from. This has been held for years. So I'm just saying that in the process of even being in community, there might be statements or things that will come up that we might not be happy. But let's always remember why those statements may come up. It is not an intent to hurt you, but it's because we have been oppressed and we're living with this trauma for many years. And those things will come and it's okay. We have to accept, we have to believe those things are okay. So that when we go in there and then we experience them, we don't quail and come back. We always have to, Triana, you know this, you guys always say, always tap in and don't tap out, right? Like always just sustain that power, sustain that energy. Yes, we live with trauma, but Black people are the most resilient people on the planet. If any race is ever treated the way we've been treated, I don't think they will survive. No one will survive, but we're very powerful people. And so as Sierra said, we should just also look up to the power that we have so that we can move forward with this. Let's continually support each other, learn from each other's culture, mentor our Black youth, and let's keep that fire of communism called community. I think that that's just one piece that I'll share for now.
Thank you so much. Adana, please.
Yes, Sierra and Eric said a lot already, and I really appreciate hearing everyone. Just to add on, I think we have to, yes, recognize the traumas and like specifically talk about our mental health. There's so much, as like Black people, African Americans, African immigrants that we have dealt with in our histories for centuries, hundreds of years. And I find that, mental health in our communities, there's a big stigma, unfortunately, and for me personally, like, I think it's so important to recognize mental health, to work on your mental health. Like, so, and then, I just how people like to, work out like their physical bodies. I think you really need to also work on your mind. There's so much as Black people, as Africans, we've gone through so much. We've already mentioned everything, like from slavery to colonization, to the capitalism, poverty, systemic racism. We've gone through so much. And Eric, like you said, like if any other racial group has gone through what we've gone through, no, we would not be able to survive. We are very powerful beings. But in order for us to really heal too, we really got to talk about the mental health aspect. I mean, for me, like being in, immigrant family, talking about emotions sometimes, talking about like even mental health, talking about going to therapy, that's not spoken about. Not at all. It's like, oh, therapy. Why would you go to therapy? The only reason, some people would believe of going to therapy is if you're crazy, is you're going through a mental health issue, you're having a mental health disorder, an episode, whatever you want to call it. But, I believe that, seeing a therapist, working on your mental health is absolutely vital. And there's nothing to be ashamed of for that. There should never be any stigma about that, because there's so many things that we have dealt with to this day that still affect us. And I think in order for us to as powerful as we are, we do need to acknowledge the trauma that we've gone through. We have to acknowledge, our mental health in order for us to truly heal. And as hard as it is, it's very hard, it's very difficult, and, like Eric, like you said, we have to recognize that. And Sierra, like you said too, the post-traumatic slavery syndrome, like that is such a real thing, and people don't really know about that. But if you really think about it, there's just so much stuff that goes into, what we've gone through in our society to this day. But we need to make sure that we can have those open spaces, open communication, as hard and difficult as it may be. Because I think that if we cannot even talk about, just like everyday experiences that we go through as Black Americans, Black folks, African Americans, like if we you can't even talk about that, how can we truly heal? It's a work in process, a work in progress, That's something that is going to take time. But I think that if we can at least take away that stigma and that shame, like that would be so uplifting. That would be so refreshing. And I feel like it can make us even more powerful, even more resilient. Like we already are resilient, but can you imagine, talking about your mental health and not feeling that stigma, that uncomfortability, not feeling ashamed? Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing. And it can be so important. It's so important for us to be able to do that. And we can truly heal from that if we can talk about mental health.
Thank you so much. Tiana, do you want to say a word and then we go to the next portion? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys. I agree with everything that's been said wholeheartedly. And what I'll add actually to this is that, again, going back to the Sankofa model, learning so much about African, the beginnings of our civilizations. How did we do it in Kemet, ancient Egypt, right? That has really been guiding me. They had what is called social covenants. We can call it a community covenant. We need to begin to introduce community covenants into our communities, period. What does it mean when we say we're moving collectively? What does it even mean to be Black in America? We don't really have a covenant for that. I love what you were just talking about, Eric, in terms of the Ashanti crest and being able to bring that rich history and culture and understanding into that space, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Our people knew how to do this better. They did. So we need to just go back. We need to create community covenants that allow people to understand that they are the best that they can ever be, right? To walk away from their conditionings, to begin to embrace the laws of Ma'at. Because let's be real here, so much of this colonialism was really revolving around religion, the control of religion, the control of faith, the belief system. And unfortunately, that has wrecked a lot of our communities, even when we look at the history of it. And when people now, younger generations, why aren't people going to church? It's because they've seen pastors do weird things. And they're like, is that even, are they doing right things, right? And so I think you're right, Adana. We need to talk about things like mental health, but we also need to talk about some of the things that have actually oppressed us even more, that we brought into our own lives, that we've adopted as a practice, as a piece of who we are. And we have to acknowledge that our people had something before other things were shoved down their throats. What was that? How did our people connect to the soil, connect to the earth, understand the planetary cycles, understood how to meditate? When you're talking about this mental health, we've gotten away from all of those practices. Our people knew about meditation. They knew how to do specific chants at specific times during the planetary cycle to bring about holistic health. We don't have holistic approaches here in this country. We need to create them. And I think community covenants is one way to do that. Just a list of this is what it is. This, when you step into this space right here, this is an Africa Town building. When you step in here, you know, first and foremost, I got to bring my best self to this space, right? If I have conflict with someone, I take it directly to them in a manner that is of love. I come to my people in love. I speak to my people in love. I mentor the youth in love. I embrace, again, the fact that I know I'm divine. I need to work on me. I need to work on me. If I'm constantly asking something outside of me to do the thing I need to be doing, it's not going to get done. I need to work on me. I need to work on my conditionings, my emotional responses. I need to make sure that when I show up for my people and my elders, that they feel that love first and foremost. So I think community covenants is another something I wanted to introduce here, because that when we talk about things that were stripped from us, let's not forget that a lot of our cultural tradition resides in our spiritual connection to the universe, to each other, to the earth. And a lot of that needs to be brought back into the present in order for us to have a strong foundation, understand how to do things differently, and not fall into the traps of the SCLC, of SNCC, of Black Panther Party, of a lot of these revolutions for Black liberation that have bubbled up throughout American history, but also got destroyed, demolished, right? How do we actually create a Black Wall Street? You need a community covenant in order to do that, because you don't bring all that trauma into this place. We're going to work on that trauma. We're going to, like Adana said, I agree so much with everyone saying we have to do all of those things to uproot a lot that has been put on us with the post-traumatic slave syndrome. All of these things, we have to really work on ourselves collectively and find ways to do that, like she said, without shame. Also bringing in these cultural aspects so that we can be rooted in something that is centuries old, that has been there for thousands of years. We need to identify with that past in order to rectify our present.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Triana. What's amazing is I was in Africa less than a month ago. And it's true that when you tap into the spiritual realm of the African power, it's there. It's there because when I was in Kenya this last trip, I was there for my mother's funeral, and we had a lot of spiritual leaders, some of whom I've never spoken in English, I've never read any book, but they can tell you a lot about you. You'd be shocked, you know. And such things, we were trained by Christianity to shun our own power, things that they can't do, the things that the African spirituality can reveal to you. Even leaders still work with this African spiritual, uh, you know, providers. Let me just call them African spiritual providers, you know, to tell them what's going to come. Things like recently, before the coronavirus pandemic, there was a grasshopper, outbreak where there were millions of grasshoppers that ate all the plants from Ethiopia, Sudan to Kenya, and people are going to face, hunger in a way that has never been seen in decades this coming year. But these spiritual leaders said these things like 20 years ago, prepare, prepare. But leaders are just politicking. They want to be like the American democracy, which is also falling apart. So where is the African democracy, and how can that be implemented in African institutions? So there's so much to be talked about here. And I want to bring us to the questions that are coming from our audience members. First, I just want to read a few comments that are not questions, and then I'm going to pose each of these comments or questions to one of our panelists. Again, I'll start with Sierra, then go to Eric, then go to Adana, then go to Triana. The first comment says, how do we get to know each other when African American brothers and sisters don't even think about going back to their roots in Africa? They spend a lot to visit Europe, South America, and Asia, but never in Africa. We need to build our relationship through following our roots. You can invest in Africa, buy land, marry, etc. It's only whites using that opportunity. This is a comment by Joel, and this is true. If you go to the coast of Mombasa, on the Indian Ocean, you find a lot of Italian men have built bungalows there, and they are marrying Black women, but they're really oppressing the population. And so I want comments here from Sierra.
Well, I'm not going to speak for all African Americans and their travel choices. That would be presumptuous of me. What I will say is that, everybody comes to this journey in a different way and from a different place, and everybody discovers their own path to it, right? And I would say that being able to travel out of the country at all, for a lot of folks, is you have to be at a certain economic level and privilege to be able to do that at all to begin with. And depending on who you are and what your experience has been and what the experience of your family and community has been, sometimes traveling outside of your county can be a challenge, much less going outside of your state or country. So I say that to say that I'm going to make an assumption here, and this is purely an assumption. I'm going to make an assumption that when we're talking about African Americans choosing other locations over Africa, we're probably talking about a small percentage of African Americans altogether, even looking at who is making that type of a decision. So I'd say let's be careful not to make it representative of all African Americans, I think, is what comes to mind for me, because I don't necessarily know that statement is based in truth. In my experience of the African American people that I know personally, many have traveled to many different parts of the world. You know, I know many people who've traveled to Africa who are African Americans, including my sister. I haven't made it yet, but my sister has, one of them. You know, and I know folks who live in LA and haven't made it up to San Francisco. So let's be careful to make a generalization like that.
And I just want to chime in a little bit because I'm sorry, Simon, you said Mombasa, and I spent quite a bit of time in Mombasa personally. And I will say that you're absolutely right. It was a stark reality for me when I got there to understand how concentrated the poverty was, but yet these amazing Italian villas were all over the waterfront. And I was like, what is going on here, right? I had a really hard time understanding that. And I learned while being there, you know, that is a thing. And absolutely what we need to do, I'll say in terms of, it is about education. A lot of Black people don't even understand that those opportunities even exist. If they did maybe save up some money and think about buying land over there, they may actually be able to do so versus here. But the opportunities in terms of that connectivity just really haven't been bubbled up to the surface, particularly in high concentrated areas of Black community, right? So again, I agree with Sierra in terms of making a kind of rationalized statement like that, but also let's be clear here that there's been no connectivity really in that regard. You know, what kind of organization or somebody can step up and say, look, we're going to be taking people to the continent because we want them to get that experience. We had some folks doing that here in Seattle. Nanika Bibi with New Black Arts West Theater was taking groups over to Ghana and, you know, showing them about trade and commerce and how they can build businesses and do direct business with Ghana. So I do think that there's small pockets of that. I know that Lakima, the Arungas have taken many of people to Kenya and given them that experience. Ade Fua has taken people over to the continent. So there's people in our community that are doing that work. But again, I just wanted to highlight that there's not enough opportunities in terms of nationally that I know of where an organization nationally is saying, no, we want to make sure people have that connection. I think that there's a space for that, for sure, for anybody to step up and do that, but it just hasn't really happened yet.
I will say here in Los Angeles, there's a wonderful organization called Social Justice Learning Institute that works with young men of color and women too, but it started off focusing on young Black men. And they take trips with young men, typically between 18 and 24 to the continent. D'Artagnan Scorza, Dr. Scorza, who runs that organization, has been doing that for a while now. So there definitely are areas where we're seeing more of this. And I wholeheartedly agree that education is definitely a way to go, because I don't know that people always make the links, but I think that it's happening more than maybe we're seeing.
Yeah, and also traveling is one of the biggest ways of educating yourself. So I do this work too. I've taken over 40 people from Seattle to Kenya, including Taket. You know, Triana and I know Taket. But I just want to check in with the panelists. Is it okay if I go to the next comment?
Yeah, there's also like just a little piece around like the cost of traveling to Africa versus Europe that some of my friends or my brothers and sisters here talked about. So sometimes they would like to go to Africa. I mean, I also do this since 2011. Every year we do travel back and forth, but mostly with students. And we're planning to go outside, you know, and increase that to our adults population, really. But it's so expensive to travel to Africa. Let's just face the fact. Maybe there's something that we can really do about like also raising funds, because there are also groups of people who really want to go, but they don't have the money. It's so easy. Like, believe in $500, you can go to Europe. But then like you really need over $1,000 to go to Africa, somewhere in Africa. So that piece can also be addressed. And yeah, and definitely the education piece. Hey, like people are seeing like people fighting their wars and stuff like that. That could be scary. But then when there's more education, people can know that it's just like maybe something happening in one part of America, it doesn't mean that it's happening all over America or something like that. So.
And then may I also add another part to that? Sometimes also the way that media represents Africa and African countries. Some people, unfortunately, some people think that Africa, all there is it's a poor, numerous number of countries. Everyone lives in huts or villages. Like, everyone's poor, everyone's in poverty. So it's like the media makes Africa look like a place that no one wants to go to. Whereas if you see countries like in Europe or in Asia, media makes it seem like it's like this wonderful, beautiful place, like all these different monuments, all these different landscapes, makes it gorgeous. And so people are more attracted to that. But then when it comes to Africa, they see the media thinking of it as this poor country, when in reality, it's not. There's many different economic resources and so many different beautiful places in Africa that it's gorgeous. But sometimes media doesn't even show that. So some people may think, oh, well, I'd rather go to Europe or Asia than the African countries. And so unfortunately, it's sometimes the way the media presents it. So people may not want to go to Africa as well. That's another reason, I believe.
Thank you. So I'm going to read a few comments here, then I'm going to pose the questions that I would like our panelists to respond to. There's a comment here from Kila Kitu in Los Angeles. I've been thinking about the difference between curing and healing in terms of bringing the diaspora together and decolonizing. How do we do both? How do we make sure we are not focusing so much on curing that we continue to leave healing to take care of itself? So I'll just let you all think about that while we continue to the next comment here. The next one here says, this is from Latu. This is also important that even Africans in Africa have ethnic cultural problems and are divided. It is real, I know, as a Kenyan Ethiopian, healing is truly the biggest step in order to come together. So that's a comment. I want to now go to there are two questions that are left that I would like for our panelists to respond to. I'll just read all of them, and then I will just wait for you all to share your thoughts about it without any kind of planning or who is going after who. So the first one is, this question is for everyone, but this one is from Dominique. But those that particularly identify as African immigrants, so the panelists identifying as immigrants, what were your first introduction to what African Americans are like? In other words, what things did you initially see in the media, TV, radio, etc.? That's question number one. Number two, this is from Joanne. She says, thank you folks for all the effort and the love towards the Black community, regardless of the roots. As part of Black children, as parents of Black children, I believe the confidence in our color and culture should come from the roots. How can we teach our children from a young age to be so proud of their color and be able not to feel any less or inferior, and teaching them that African Americans and African immigrants are all one? So while you think about that, I want to talk about something that Triana mentioned earlier, which was in regards to our narrative and who is telling our story, how are they telling it? I feel that this is also where the power that the collective Black power globally lies in how we are telling our story. You know, right now we have the internet, we have platforms that are allowing anybody from anywhere to really share what they have. So, you know, I'm very proud of the work that Triana has been doing, you know, with this, with telling our story and, you know, basically broadcasting the news from a grassroots perspective. How can we do that with the African history? How can we do that with, you know, with the healing of the African, you know, collective in general? So I think even though some of the systems were created not to work for us, we have a lot of intelligence that we can turn that system so that it works for us. What are some ways that, you know, you all think as panelists that we can, use some of these systems that were created to work against us to work for us. Thank you.
I will jump in and say that harnessing political power and running for office is absolutely at the forefront of what we need to do. I know in Los Angeles, there's an organization called LawPi. I'm going to forget what the acronym stands for, but it specifically focuses on educating African American Black women for running for public office and lifting them up as leaders. And you know, in Los Angeles, we're in an interesting place right now because for the first time in history, we have all women for our board of supervisors for LA County. And LA County board is very powerful. And our local supervisor who covers my district, Holly Mitchell, who's a former state senator and it's now our board of supervisor, you know, really came out of representing South LA. And it's incredible having her become a state senator and now being the one Black woman on the LA County Supervisory Board. But harnessing political power is huge, in my opinion.
I appreciate the leadership part, so maybe I can go. So folks in Seattle, I just wanted to share briefly that so at PG Soundstage, we run like a leadership program, and our whole goal is to kind of like, you know, achieve regional equity or work in contribution to the regional equity that folks within Seattle are working towards. And it really trains leaders to have that critical lens of equity. Aside from also learning about adaptive leadership, a series of trainings on like running for office and all the different issues that really impact our communities, right? And then we also have a C4 where we really support folks who want to go into like city council or run for office and things like that. So I really encourage you to check that website because we really want to be on the table. And as we always say, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. If we're not there to speak for ourselves, definitely someone is going to make those policies on behalf of our communities. So that is really critical. There was a question about immigrants and what's our first experience to being kind of socialized about who African Americans are before we got here. I think I shared a little bit about earlier, but really there are mixed exposures. There's one part that is looking at issues of violence through movies. And my hope is that some of those movies that they're depicting Black people playing like the bad roles or like playing some kind of roles that perpetuates or feeds into the mindset or the notion that like we're violent. My hope is that those things may reduce or even stop eventually. My hope, because that is really, really getting into the minds of people before folks get here. And also that sense of like, okay, violence, laziness, not hardworking, that kind of thing. And there's also a piece that we also admire strongly about African Americans, you know, like the way they talk and the way they dress in movies and like, yeah, those they're also very positive side, but mainly, I mean, I saw most of those stuff in movies. It was only through the Sankofa program that I coordinated that I began changing the way that I thought about African Americans. That's when really I deepened my knowledge about the community, even before I got into Seattle. And it was through the African American community that I came to Seattle. So I would say those are my first experiences to that. But when it comes to like the way that we can really use the system for ourselves, for example, when the Trainers radio program, like I'm constantly listening to it. If there are donation stuff going on, hey, I might not be in the event, but I always want to make sure I'm donating to support. Constantly like patronizing things that belong to our community is one way of, you know, investing money and also keeping the money, containing that money in our community. Those are critical because economic power, once we have that power, I mean, we can heal, we can have everything that we want. So let's be intentional about that. You may not have a lot and you may not give a lot, but any little you have, try as much as possible. On your birthdays, try as much as possible to fundraise for Black-led organizations, wherever you are. on this planet. So like those practical little things that make sure we're keeping money in our communities are really critical.
Thank you. I just want to bring to your attention the time. We have just 9 minutes to go. I just want to give a chance to one panelist to also respond to some of the questions that I posed a moment ago. Then we'll wrap up after that, unless there's a burning comment.
I can answer one of the questions. Donna, did you want to answer one and I can go after you?
No, go ahead, Triana.
Okay. There was one here from a question about how can we teach our children from a young age to be so proud of their color and be able to not feel any less or inferior, in teaching them that African Americans and African immigrants are all one. So I love this question. Thank you for asking it, by the way. And I put my camera off so I could grab a book, because I'm all about teaching our babies, right? And what I was just talking about in terms of, I've been learning in the last year about African spiritual practices. I'm very new to this, but it's so important to me to understand where my people understood, how they understood spirituality, and they actually understood it way better than we do now. But so learning from a lot of those principles has been helpful, and diving into the resources. I shared some of the books here that have been really helping me and guiding me. But this is a new one that I just got. Mr. Imhotep, if anybody follows him on IG, he does a lot of African history lessons. And he worked for 30 years or something to research and create this book. It's called My African Icons. If you guys can see that there, it's called My African Icons. And it really is it's like a storytelling book, but it breaks down each one of the icons one by one. And so what I've been doing with my sons is like, my 14-year-old was like, Mom, really? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. You're going to learn about each one of these. I don't care if you think it's a picture book or it's only for your 6-year-old brother. No, we're going to sit here. We're going to read together. Understanding certain things around the history has been very helpful for me. There's a book called Heru Resurrection. And this, you guys can find all these on like Amazon or something, but really it was like the original story of Aset and Aser and their son Heru. And it was like the Mary and Joseph and Jesus, but it was like all these amazing Black, strong figures. And you're like, man, just that alone, me reading that book to my sons and them understanding like, oh man, like, okay, because we were Christians, that's what I grew up to be. I didn't know, but we've always understood, wait a minute, was that the oppressor putting that on us? So really this idea, and I think it's been so helpful for me in my household. So I'll just say that going back to the origination of it, there's so many amazing books. We got to start educating our babies on the brilliance that they are, the kings and queens. We built the pyramids, just starting to inflict all of that knowledge on their brains so that when they step out, they can step out with their chest held high and their heads held high, and they can be proud that they are the ones. We invented all of these amazing things right here in this country. Black Americans did. We invented amazing things. And in Africa, we did amazing things with regard to civilization. We taught a lot of people how to live. We taught a lot of people about agriculture and how to build. So when we think about a lot of the native things that happen here on American soil, let's teach our babies about all of the beautiful things that were happening on the continent. And there's now new people that are writing books so that we can begin to do that, because I think we've historically been, we've historically been left out of this kind of stuff. We don't know this. We don't know who these icons are. We don't necessarily, I didn't know them when I was growing up. So I'm going to change that for the next generation. I think that's the way we begin to do that, because then it's just about seeing ourselves as great, seeing ourselves as who we were as the original people. And it kind of goes back to that, which I think blends this idea of, whether you're African American or African, it doesn't matter. We all really come from that central source. And it's really about teaching and infusing that into the next generations.
Thank you so much, Triana. I want to welcome your son first to the discussion. He's a panelist officially. What's your name?
You want to tell your name? Did he get shy? That's a Johnny, you guys. It means he who wins the struggle.
It's nice, nice. So I want to just say a few things as we wrap up today's conversation. Number one, thank you to Michael Mugambe and Immigrant Guide for making today's conversation possible. Thank you to Adana. Thank you to Eric. Thank you to Sierra. And thank you to Triana for being our panelists today. Today we covered so many things. For those who joined us late, we went through quite a few things. We talked about, the beliefs and experiences and misconceptions that continue keeping the African and African American communities divided. We talked about the systems that were created to continue perpetuating this division and the tension. We talked about how the liberation and Black Lives Matter movements are being affected by these divisions. Then we talked about what we can do now. We talked about the trauma. I want to also just say that with technology, one of the things I think we could do as a form of an action that we can take is even Instagram lives. We can have those with activists in other parts of the continent and really tell them what we are experiencing, and what they are experiencing they can also share with us. Many people in this call today don't know that Seattle is actually a city that people are benchmarking activism with. When I was in Kenya, a lot of leading activists were telling me that since the year began, they've been watching Seattle daily. What's going on in Seattle is what dictates Black Lives Matter movement globally. I didn't know that until I was out of Seattle. So even though we have the Microsoft and all other big companies here, we are also respected for the way that our activism is actually working. If you see what Africa Town is doing, it shows that activism works. How can we share this knowledge with other people who have a desire to learn how to make activism work for their communities? So with that, I just want to say again, thank you, and take good care of yourselves. And we will be seeing each other again soon. Remember that this is a 20-part series. And we will be having 19 other dialogues. Some of them will be happening in private. So I just want to thank you, and, be well. All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Simon, for the wonderful moderation. That was excellent hosting. I really appreciate you. Thank you, brother.
Yes, thank you all so much for your insight. Thank you so much for everyone listening in. I really appreciate the space, and I really appreciate just hearing from everybody and their information and insight. So thank you. Really appreciate all of you.
Fantastic. Michael, could we actually bring you back so that we see your face and you just give us the closing comments?
Agreed. I just wanted to say thanks to all the panelists. I can't wait to connect even further. Thank you all.
Yeah, I need to see you. I need to see you, Triana. I will see you. I will reach out to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Adana. And thank you, Trian. It's been really a wonderful conversation. We are looking forward to such for the next 19 sessions. What's going to happen? Some of our sessions are going to be closed door, whereby you have to register prior to that date so that you are let in, because we are going to open a safe space to share, to become vulnerable, to speak your mind without fearing other people judging you or seeing you. And yet others are going to be public, like this one, whereby we're going to come back and be and go virtual and go all over the world. I would like to thank the Immigrant Guide interns and volunteers who put this thing together, who've worked day and night to make sure that they market, they write whatever needs to be written, they come up with a curriculum. It's so wonderful. We are proud of you. I would like to also thank the Sava Karim Show. We've been hosted today by the Sava Karim Show on Facebook. And yeah, on Facebook, and it's a very popular show whereby immigrants from different countries participate every Saturday on that show, and and talk about issues of their community importance. Thank you so much, Sava. Yeah, we thank everyone, and we are looking forward to having you back. Thank you.